With the Ethan Winters storyline finally wrapped up, and Resident Evil 9 more than likely being Capcom's next major title that they will release within Resident Evil, I'm really hoping that the series can finally feel like it's moving forward for the first time since really Resident Evil 6. Because I've always felt like the Ethan Winters saga should have been a spin-off series within Resident Evil rather than taking up two mainline games. I just feel like because of that, 7 and 8 have felt more like filler arcs to Resident Evil rather than games that continue on the actual storyline, and because of that, it feels like the series has really been put on pause so that we can focus in on this random character, Ethan Winters, and his story of looking for his wife in the first game and then looking for his daughter in the second game. Meanwhile, we haven't seen any of the core characters in forever outside of Chris, but even then, Chris has only really been in the background here and there. And so I'm really hopeful that Resident Evil 9 will finally have the series move forward again. Like I've said before in other videos, it seems as though Resident Evil 9 is going to focus in on Chris and his Hound Wolf squad, and maybe even Jill investigating the BSA in Europe and seeing what it is that's going on, why they're using bioweapons, and who's behind it all. That seems like that's going to be the plot to Resident Evil 9. But we know Capcom and we know how they are with cliffhangers. Like in Resident Evil 6, pretty much every one of those cliffhangers, we don't know what happened. Outside of Chris, you could argue that we see what happens with his story, but we don't know what happens to any of those other characters after Resident Evil 6. Or the Revelation series. What happened to Alex Wesker? We still are waiting on that. So there's plenty of examples of Capcom giving us these cliffhangers and then doing nothing with them. So Resident Evil 9 could be something completely different from Chris and his team investigating the BSAA. We might never see that storyline, knowing Capcom. But I'm hopeful that we will, and with it, it will feel like Resident Evil is finally moving forward again. We're past Winter's saga, and now we can get back to the core cast of characters and the main story of Resident Evil. And that's not to say that I'm against new characters being introduced into the series, because I love seeing new characters. And I think it's necessary for us to start to get new characters because all of our core characters are getting older outside of Jill now, and they're going to need someone to eventually replace them. So I'm in favor of new characters. I love Sheva in 5. I like Jake in 6. These characters were really cool and they were interesting. It's just the Winter storyline always felt like it was a spinoff to me. But now with that story all wrapped up and finished, we can now look forward to seeing what Capcom has planned for Resident Evil moving forward. And as I've already mentioned, I'm hoping that it's going to be something that feels as though the overarching story is now moving forward. I really hope Capcom doesn't have plans to now introduce another random character that we have to follow that individual's story and do this whole thing all over again. I really hope that Resident Evil 9 will focus in on the core cast of characters and we can finally get back to having things move forward with everyone and not just focus in on one random individual. I would really love to learn more about the connections. Honestly, I think that has a whole lot of potential because the connections could truly be that next Umbrella Corporation level threat, where Umbrella was around for multiple games during their run, whereas other groups like Los Illuminados or even Neo Umbrella, they were only around for maybe 1 or 2 games and then they fell apart. So the connections could potentially be a corporation or a group that sticks around for multiple titles, and I think that would be really cool to see. Maybe the connections are the ones that are behind the corruption of the BSAA and why they are all of a sudden using bioweapons. So that would be a really cool thing to see. Furthermore, with the connections, whoever is in charge of that group, maybe they are the next puppet master like Albert Wesker. So that would be a really cool thing to see as well. Maybe it's Alex Wesker who's behind the connections or someone else. Maybe it's Albert Wesker himself. Although I personally would not be in favor of that, there's just a lot of potential with the connections if Capcom plays their cards right. And then as I said previously, I just really want to see our core cast come back to the games. I want to see Leon again. I want to see Ada, Jill, Claire, Jake, Sherry, like all of these characters, and even Chris, because in 7 and 8, as I said, he was just a behind the scenes character. You know, he was just in the background. He didn't play a main role. So to see him once again front and center would be great, and I would love it. So we're just gonna have to wait and see what Capcom has planned for Resident Evil 9 since nothing's been confirmed as of yet. Like I said, we could all think they're doing one thing for Resident Evil 9 and Capcom comes out and there's a completely different thing. It's opposite to what anyone was expecting. You just never know. Ideally, I think most fans would agree that they would like to see it be about Chris and his team investigating the BSAA and seeing what it is that's going on, and maybe Jill joins them. I think that's ideally what most people would like to see, but you never know with Capcom. They could definitely take that cliffhanger at the end of Resident Evil Village and do absolutely nothing with it, and we would have yet another cliffhanger by Capcom that is just kind of left to be forgotten about. Like many of the characters that they develop, where they just get thrown on the forgotten about island and we just never see anything come of it. So that could definitely happen. We'll just have to kind of, like I said, wait and see until Capcom gives us some official news regarding Resident Evil 9. Fingers crossed that it's more in line with what we would like to see, but let me know what your thoughts are on all of this. Do you agree with what I'm saying about 7 and 8 kind of feeling like those were filler arc games, and that as a result, the main events of Resident Evil have felt like they've been on pause since Resident Evil 6? Or did you enjoy 7 and 8, and do you think that they deserve to be a part of the mainline entries? Let me know your thoughts on all of this. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video here, and I shall see you all on the next one. See you then.